Is there any proof for God? And I mean actual proof, not the bold rationalizations that the religious come up with to comfort their flock. And the answer to that question is no. Just no. And today, we're going to prove it once again as a minuscule channel tries to trot out the standard claims, and we're going to rip up each and every single one of them until there's nothing left. So if you want to see that, stay tuned. Today, we're going to go back to Scriptures in Context TV, the channel so unsuccessful that they still haven't gotten a single new subscriber since the last time we looked in. And that number is 1, just for those keeping track. And I'm starting to think his one and only subscriber is his mother or something, because nobody seems to give a damn. Maybe even she can't stand him, she just feels obligated. I don't know. Anyhow, he's going to make some claims about proof for God, yet he doesn't actually know what that word means, nor does he have any clue whatsoever how to rationally evaluate ideas. Because who cares about that, right? Well, me. I care, and I suspect you do too. So let's go watch him utterly fail, because that's hardly a surprise.
What is the proof for God? Is there any conclusive proof of God? In looking for conclusive proof of God, one must first consider what type of evidence counts.
Well, the only kind of evidence that could conceivably count would be objective in nature. If it's something that only occurs in your own head, then how could you ever be sure that it isn't a delusion or wishful thinking or some other kind of mental aberration? If it's something that you cannot independently verify, how can you be certain that it ever happened at all? So it has to be something that multiple independent people can look at and evaluate independently without having to hold a particular conclusion on the veracity of said evidence first. Give us some of that, because if you can't, we have no reason whatsoever to take any of this claimed evidence seriously. So show us what you've got, what you've actually got, because nothing less will do.
For example, we cannot see the wind, yet we know it exists because we feel it, hear it, and see its effect.
Yet, you don't seem to be able to do any of that with any god, period. And yes, if you release smoke into the wind, you can see the wind. The one defining factor of all of that is that you can actually demonstrate that the wind is real. We don't have to rely on faith. You can see the effects and then objectively measure the cause, and that's something that you can't do with a god. Now, I ran into this stupid shit not too long ago with somebody who posted on one of my videos that, well, gravity isn't objective. Gravity isn't material. Yeah, it is. Sorry, because we can independently and objectively detect it. We can't see it, but there's lots of shit that we can't see. We can absolutely measure it and its effects. None of that can be done with a god. And this asshole decided to go, oh, well, you should stop being more precise in your wording. No, you should stop being so fucking pedantic, because you're just making a fool of yourself. Anyway, let's get back on track. The religious can only assert that their deity is responsible, but they can't actually demonstrate that it's true. You can't just point to some random event and say, see, God did it. Any more than you can point to something falling over and say, see, the wind did it. No, you actually have to be able to demonstrate that there's a direct, objective, verifiable causal link between the event and the claimed cause. And the religious can never do that, can they?
Likewise, no one has touched the sun, yet we know it exists because we can see its impact in our world and beyond.
Plus the fact that we can just look up and see it. How do you do that with your God? These examples are not remotely analogous to what the religious claim about their deities. It doesn't matter what you say. It matters what you can prove. And unfortunately, You people can't prove a damn thing. Get to work.
In the same way, we can speak of evidence for God from the basis of the things God has made and the ways God has worked in the universe as well as in our individual lives.
Prove it, because that's just an unsubstantiated claim that you would need to provide evidence for, and I don't think you can. Again, your beliefs in the matter don't mean a damn thing. You have to objectively demonstrate it such that people who don't come to your conclusion or don't come from your faith tradition can look at it and become convinced that your conclusion warrants acceptance. The religious who are already there, they think it's obvious, but for someone who isn't there, for someone who doesn't believe the things that you believe, it looks a whole lot like ludicrous nonsense. Because it is. I can assert invisible, intangible, universe-creating pixies into any statement theists make about their gods, and it doesn't change the outcome any. Why? Because the whole thing is ludicrous bullshit. And it's sad how they can't figure that out.
One logical way in which we can provide proof for God's existence is through the natural universe. The universe is either an illusion, is eternal, or had a beginning.
But that doesn't mean that your God did it. That doesn't mean that any God did it. That's the conclusion that you're smuggling in, to which you are completely blinded. Just because you want it to be true, that doesn't make it true. You need to provide something more than that, and the religious are utterly terrible at finding anything actually convincing that doesn't rely on their blind faith already. You can sit there all day long and scream, "I'm right, I'm right, I'm right." That doesn't make you right, not until you can prove it with objectively verifiable evidence. You got any of that? Yeah, I didn't think so.
Since we would normally reject that all existence is an illusion, and scientific evidence points toward a beginning of all space, matter, time, and energy, it is most likely that all created things had a beginning. Something that has a beginning requires a cause. This first cause can be defined as God. The best evidence or proof points toward his existence.
Really? Prove it. I mean, I suppose you can define it as anything that you want. I could define it as invisible, intangible, universe-creating pixies. That doesn't make it so. What he's really doing here, what he's demonstrably doing here, is defining his God into existence. This thing, whatever this thing is, if this thing even exists and isn't just some natural event that I don't like or can't understand, and even if it is, I'm just going to arbitrarily call it a god and then bow down and kiss its ass, and you have to do the same thing. No, I don't, because that's bullshit. I don't have to do anything of the sort, and it's utterly stupid if you do. That's not how rational thinking works. You actually have to prove that there was this cause and that it was what you want to claim that it is. And you haven't done any of that. You haven't even tried. You've just assumed it because it makes you feel good to do so. And that's just stupid. Knock it off.
A second way to speak of proof for God's existence is found in the complexity of design throughout creation.
You are smuggling absolutely everything in here. You are asserting creation without actually demonstrating it. You are assuming complexity without showing that it exists, just because you've got a conclusion that you desperately want to reach. And that's really what all of this is about. They've already made up their minds for emotional reasons, and now they're just trying to work backwards so that people stop pointing it out to them and laughing. And that's not how logic and critical thinking work. You have to go with the evidence first before you reach a conclusion. And what conclusion you reach doesn't matter if it makes you happy. You can't cherry pick the data to a conclusion that you've already come to. And if you do that, you're doing intelligence entirely wrong. But that's really all they have, and it's utterly pathetic. This becomes an article of faith, not evidence of fact. Because, who needs the facts anyhow? Certainly not the religiously delusional.
From the complexity of the stars in the sky to the vast number of advanced parts within even the tiniest cell, the evidence points toward intentional design rather than random events evolving toward today's observable universe.
Really? Prove it. I know we keep saying this, but it never gets any better. All right, you can't because we've already established that. You can just assert things that fall in line with the emotionally comforting conclusion that you've already adopted. And this is why none of this ever convinces a skeptic. Not ever. It's not that we're predisposed to reject your silly ideas. It's that your ideas are so far beyond anything remotely rational as to be utterly laughable. But of course, you don't care about that because, fee-fees. You'd much rather get that chemical cocktail in your head than have to deal with the possibility of a potentially uncomfortable reality that doesn't actually support your beliefs. Because you only care about your beliefs. You don't care about the actual facts. You know who cares about the facts? Oh yeah, rational people.
In philosophy, this is described as the argument from design or the teleological argument for God's existence.
And that's been soundly torn apart by thousands of skeptics over thousands of years. It's toast, except for those who only care about their feelings and not remotely about the facts. It isn't defensible in any way, shape, or form. It's just a tool used by the delusional to defend their delusions to other people similarly afflicted. It's the dumb leading the dumb. And I'm not sure why that's supposed to be impressive.
A third way to discuss proof of God is found in the universal sense of morality,
which doesn't actually exist. Again, this is something that you would have to prove, not just assert, and the religious simply can't do that. There are some common elements simply because humans tend to need the same kinds of things, but there are also vast differences. The problem here is the distinct lack of life experience that these people tend to have. When these people rarely, if ever, leave the comfort of their own native society, they don't see just how different morals are in the real world. Because these people don't live in the real world. They live in a religious fantasy land in their heads where these arguments might make some kind of sense, but none of it ever flies out here where the rest of us live. It's also why the religious tend to hide in their insular little groups where nobody ever tells them that their beliefs sound utterly asinine. Because newsflash for you people, they do. To anyone who's not already fanatically immersed in them.
In other words, every person adheres to some system of right and wrong, even though people vary greatly in what is accepted as right or wrong.
Oh, it's some system of right and wrong. Well, not a common system, not a universal system, just some system. And that's about as stupid as saying humans take in energy to function and the wind needs energy to function, therefore the wind and humans are the same thing. Are you people really this stupid? Wait, don't answer that because we already know.
This universal sense of right and wrong points toward an outside, objective source of morality. This is often called the moral argument for God's existence.
And that's already been defeated too. Because you notice what he's doing here, right? He's claiming this thing exists, and then tacking on, therefore God did it. He hasn't demonstrated a direct causal link between those two statements, nor can he. He just assumes that it's true because it makes him tingle inside. This is why these Proof for God videos are so utterly laughable. Everybody can see the blatant failures except him. He's totally blind to it because he just doesn't care. He's working backwards from his conclusion, reached for entirely emotional reasons, trying to find any argument or claim that he can make that seems to support his faith. He makes the same mistakes over and over and over, and while the rest of us are just rolling on the floor laughing at his buffoonery, he's actually serious. And that doesn't say a lot of good things about his mental capacity.
Yet another way to speak of evidence for God is to appeal to the vast number of unexplained occurrences of miracles and the supernatural.
Really? Name one. Now prove it. Because that's the thing. They find something that they don't understand, and then they just stuff God in there and pretend they've answered the question. No, if we don't know, we don't know. God is only the answer once you objectively show that God is the answer. And you have to prove that God exists first. Get on that. These people have never done that, nor have they really even tried, because we're right back to blind faith. There has never once been anything that has been demonstrated to be supernatural. They can't even define what the supernatural is. They can only say, well, the supernatural isn't this. Great. What is it? Don't tell me what it isn't. Tell me what it is. It's just a mask for their own ignorance. They don't know. They don't care. They just blindly believe. You don't get to just staple God all over anything that you can't answer and pretend that somehow you've done a good thing. You've just made yourself look like a complete idiot. Mostly because you are.
Are all of these events explainable by natural causes? If not, then the existence of a supernatural being is at least possible.
Possible doesn't mean true. I mean, I suppose anything is possible if you squint at it the right way, but that doesn't mean that anyone ought to believe that it's true until there is objectively demonstrable evidence that it is. The simple fact is, for every case where a supernatural cause was once posited, not once has the real answer ever turned out to be supernatural. Not once, not ever. It's always natural, and there's no reason to think that it will ever be otherwise. Of course, we keep looking and testing and verifying, and unfortunately, the religious just keep believing, and when their favorite answer turns out to be wrong, they don't change their minds because they just don't give a shit. They just attach themselves to yet another unjustified claim until that one likewise is disproven. Because these people are just pathetic children, and they need professional help.
More specific to the God of the Bible are the many predictions made regarding the Jewish Messiah in the Old Testament that were fulfilled in Jesus Christ. See this article for more.
Yeah, I don't think so, because none of that stands up to any level of critical scrutiny. It doesn't matter what you want to believe is true. It matters only what you can prove, and these people can't prove a damn thing. The Bible is a mess. A ton of anonymous claims made about a pseudo-religious figure and then edited over time to make it sound cohesive. The Jewish scriptures were just sitting there, waiting for anyone to pick up and use and abuse, because people already took them seriously. How hard is it for an enterprising God-maker to grab claims out of the Torah and then claim, without proving it, that Jesus fulfilled them? Really? Prove it. Show your work. They do it because they want it to be true, yet that's not the most rational conclusion. The most rational conclusion is that ancient writers with a reason to push the Jesus narrative took ideas from the existing mythology, both the Old Testament and other surrounding cultures, and used it to make Jesus seem more likely. Until you can prove that any of it ever actually happened, and that would mean you'd have to prove that Jesus conclusively existed, and I don't mean the potential guy running around Palestine, I mean the actual man God that you people believe was there, then you're just wasting everybody's time. But what else is new, right?
Though predicted hundreds of years before his coming, they described his virgin birth, Isaiah chapter 7 verse 14, his town of birth, Bethlehem, Micah chapter 5 verse 2, his Jewish tribe, Judah, and many other areas, including his suffering, Isaiah chapter 53, Psalm chapter 22.
And all of that has already been debunked because a lot of that wasn't even prophetic language in the Torah. It's because the anonymous writer of Matthew, whoever the hell that was, and you notice it's always Matthew here, was specifically trying to convert the Jews. He took their own book and he used it against them, and the vast majority of them took one look at his claims and laughed. That ought to tell you something. It's ripping passages out of context, ignoring the actual meaning of most of it, and pretending that because you could string a couple of words together and then make bald claims about a possible itinerant rabbi that might have wandered Palestine 2,000 years ago, that somehow it made it worth believing. And he was wrong, just as wrong then as Christians are today. The moment that you give these ideas more than a sideways glance, they all implode into a clear and obvious mess of falsehoods. But they don't care because fifis. Let's never forget that.
Though one could argue for a few seemingly random connections, the number of accurate predictions and level of detail make it so improbable as to be considered statistically impossible for one man to coincidentally meet them all.
Only if you assume that any of it happened in the first place. And remember, that's just an assumption. You can't actually prove it. Yet again, this is where faith enters the fray, and faith doesn't actually get you anywhere. You can have all the faith in the world that 1 + 1 = 46. That doesn't change the fact that you're wrong. Faith doesn't mean anything. You have to go in and verify each and every claim independently, and unfortunately for the faithful, they've got nothing. Nothing at all. Nothing but delusion anyhow. And that's why, if you look at a lot of the so-called scholars that really push these ideas, you'll notice one thing about them near universally. Most of them work for universities, religious universities, that require all faculty, employees, and students for that matter, to sign an ironclad statement of faith. They can't disagree no matter what the facts say. It's why, for example, apologist Mike Licona pushes so hard for the Christian faith. Because if he doesn't, he can lose his job. And that's actually happened once before. He got his ass fired. Anybody who has to sign a binding profession of faith, you can't trust them because they are automatically mentally hobbled against any credible evaluation of the truth. You notice science doesn't work that way, right? Wonder why?
Fulfilled biblical prophecy points toward a God who is sovereign and omnipotent. While some would reject these arguments as conclusive proof of God, the evidence for an eternal, all-powerful creator God is strong.
Not remotely true. Now, I've already pointed out where every single one of these claims fails the rational sniff test. This is made to appeal to people who already believe. It's not going to convince anyone who doesn't. If you haven't already polluted your mind with this complete religious bullshit, it's only going to make you roll your eyes, and the apologists know it. That's why they spend a lot of time making excuses for why they fail so regularly. It's all emotional excuses for why they believe, and more emotional excuses for why an increasing number of people are leaving it all behind. Because that's all this is. It's a massive appeal to emotion. And that's utterly childish.
Further, the evidence for the God of the Bible and Jesus the Messiah include great detail worthy of further study for those investigating the claims of Christianity.
And once you do investigate them, any rational person has no choice but to walk away laughing. They just don't stand up to any kind of critical scrutiny whatsoever. This isn't evidence. This is wishful thinking. It doesn't actually get the religious anywhere, and they really don't care. It's all about feelings and never about facts. It's about getting your emotional jollies and not about finding a rational, critically evaluated view of the real world as it actually exists. Because the religious just don't care about that one bit. And that's kind of sad, isn't it? So that's where he leaves off, and I think it's utterly embarrassing, or at least it should be, if these people were capable of any kind of rational self-reflection. We just come around to the inescapable conclusion that these people just aren't interested in whether their beliefs are true or not. If they did, they wouldn't keep making the same old, tired, absurdly ludicrous mistakes time and time again. It only demonstrates that they don't watch their own videos, or at least they don't think about it, because they really just don't care. And that's true of all of them if you notice, because all of them are really doing the same damn thing. Muslims, Hindus, Christians, Jews, you name it, they're all on the same fail train to nowhere, making claims only because it gets them where they want to go, even if their destination isn't actually real. And that shouldn't be acceptable, not in the modern world. Yet somehow, people think they aren't allowed to criticize this steaming pile of religious horseshit. Yet we are, and we should be, because this crap hurts people. This kind of mental masturbation makes people very, very dead. How many news stories do we have to see of the religious demanding that they've been cleansed by the blood of Jesus and ew at that, only to catch COVID and die? I mean, good riddance and all, but how many other innocent people did they infect along the way? How many of them have denied proper medical care to their innocent children? How many of them have prayed for their problems to go away instead of just getting off their knees and getting to work? This is dangerous, and the more seriously you take it, the more dangerous it is. Religion, and indeed all irrationality, it has to be stopped. The time to speak up is now. It's not like they have any intellectual defense. They are just children, living in adult bodies, and, Lucy, somebody needs an intellectual spanking. Line your asses up in the air and get what you've got coming to you, 'cause you people deserve it.